Hmm.
All right, take it away when you're ready.
All right, so before we start, could you just
Hmm.
state your name and spell it for us for the transcription?
Conrad Hurt, Conradhurtt.
Lovely, thank you, Conrad.
Hmm.
We're going to start just really easy. I think I would love to just know a little bit about you. How
Uh,
long have you been an educator, and how did you get to
This
it?
much.
well, in '91 I started as a substitute teacher. So now that makes 30 years. And my whole family, my sister, my brother, my mother, and my father are all teachers or were teachers. Um, and so carrying on the family business.
Love it, love it. And, we'll start with, I think, a bit of a blanket question, but you know kind of what our subject matter is about. In your experience, why do you think it's so important that we're talking about trauma today?
Well, here we are a year and a half after COVID-19 started, and there's not a person on the planet that doesn't have trauma from COVID-19. I mean, I can't imagine anyone who's escaped it. So certainly in the classroom with kids, I mean, they have the least power of anyone to control their situation. So uh, not being able to get the vaccine, and then many of them still can't even today because they're too young. So yeah, I mean, and then before COVID-19, of course, we had plenty of other kind of trauma, but especially now.
And in your experience in the classroom, you know, when you see a child with trauma, what is that? How does that affect a child's ability to learn?
No, it makes all the difference. I remember early on when I was getting my teaching credential, they were telling us that a child cannot learn if they're stressed out, anxious, nervous. That one of the roles of the teacher is to create a learning environment that's just a learning environment. And if there's anything we as teachers can do to create that environment that's conducive to learning, and unfortunately, sometimes teachers do the opposite. They'll get angry or upset or something and freak out a student, make them anxious, and then or send them to the principal or the dean or whatever they may do to escalate a situation instead of de-escalate it. And then it's almost impossible for a child to learn after that. Yeah.
Yeah. In your experience, what have you seen as signs of trauma, or how do you recognize that in a child?
Well, we always deal with behavior issues, and if it's the same behavior as yesterday and last week, then maybe there's no additional trauma. But if a student is acting particularly strange or unusual, different from before, then who knows what could have happened since I saw the student yesterday. Could have been any variety of things. And, it's helpful just to ask, hey, what's going on? How you doing today? Anything new? You seem a little upset. Is anything happening? So by asking, you can find out what happened or not. They might not say anything. They might not tell you, but just being aware that there may be trauma. The principal of my school actually showed a great little film. It's very short to the whole staff, and the title was "We Don't Know What's Going On with People," and so it just showed what you would just see as random students and teachers, administrators, and then the subtitle would tell us something horrific that happened to them lately. And the message was just be aware. We don't know what's going on with people. They may be going through something.
That's such an important message.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of teachers, especially new ones in the classroom, will focus a lot on kind of learning outcomes or achievement, and they'll forget or have a lot of other competing commitments and not check in with students.
Oh yeah.
So if you're thinking about after 30 years of experience, your advice,
Mm-hmm.
how can teachers think about juggling the knowledge of you need to check in with a student, and you also need to get, the learning happening. There's 30 students sometimes in
Right.
the classroom. Like, how do you think about that?
Well, I tell you, it's been an evolution for me because when I first started, I was told, set an example, send a kid to the office and then everyone else will behave. Um, and of course, it's horrible. But that's what I was told. That's what other teachers were doing. Um, or the first 6 weeks, you got to show them who's boss and be super strict. And then the rest of the year will be a dream. But I think all that just is adding trauma to the students already. So I entered several years of just, it seemed like me against them, and the group mentality was stronger than I was. And I have actually got overwhelmed and thought about quitting teaching. But I had this opportunity to become a resource specialist, which is just working one-on-one with students. Made all the difference. I did that for 9 years. It just totally rearranged my thinking. Instead of me against a crowd of 30, it was more like, what can I do to help you pass your classes? Okay, these are your grades. I'm having a meeting with your parent, but I became a special ed teacher. So I had the IEP meeting, and what can we do to make you succeed? And now I'm back in the classroom, but I have that 9 years of experience of just, I'm on your side, we're working together, and the most difficult student in your classroom that's causing the most trouble, you sit down with them one-on-one and talk to them. And they're a human being. I'm a human being. You're a human being. You have parents. Let's all work together and figure out what's happening. Whereas if you have that same student in a class of 30 and you're trying to teach and you have all this long list, just can't get past this. It's like a stand-up comic trying to do the routine. There's a heckler. Just can't get past it. So anyway, my years in special ed and just working with students have just helped me to integrate my teaching with that ability to help a student, whatever it takes. And so much of teaching is like a split personality. They tell you, oh, you got to be firm and you got to be understanding. It's like schizophrenic or some kind of dual personality. They respect you, but they love you. And the same, you just can't get away from it. I'm a caring person who cares about you. I'm going to check in with you. And we have this curriculum to get to. But, during COVID-19, so often what was happening in the world wound up in the lesson, and vice versa. I'd be teaching something which, like I was teaching U.S. history, and we know it just repeats itself. So much of the time I could bring in what was happening today to the lesson. So it didn't have to be so split.
So that reminds me, as we think about trauma, a kid's trauma is not just their own, it's often a symptom of community trauma. So is there a time that stands out to you when you were able to see the impact of community trauma on your classroom and work through it? It's okay if the answer is no, but if the answer is yes, would love to hear about it.
So the impact of community trauma on my classroom,
Mm-hmm.
and as a negative effect?
No, I mean, so for example, when I think about this, in my classroom, the community that I taught in was predominantly black, and so there was a lot of race-based violence that was happening in Philly at the time. And we actually have a historical kind of war going on between the police and the black communities in Philly.
Yeah.
And so every day there'd be kind of this feeling of stress when school resource officers would meander through the hallways.
Okay.
And it got to the point where I realized, like, wow, my entire classroom is really feeling this stress. Like, discipline is impossible. We got to stop and really think about it.
Okay.
And I'm wondering if you think about LA or you think about kind of your student population, especially special ed students. I'm sure
Right.
there's a lot of stress or trauma that comes from having to deal with
Mm.
their own like disabilities, right?
Right.
And
Right.
if you've ever seen kind of a larger community trauma manifest in the classroom.
Well, all I can really think about now is COVID and how it affected everything. But we had my school is in a pretty expensive part of town, and I've been there 15 years. Historically, we have a lot of students coming from a really an area of town with a lot of crime, and conflict happens, whether it be gangs or whatever, fighting, and it's been this just 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 the way the school has set up with having groups of people come in that are not from the school, and then people from that catchment area of the school just not really understanding the groups that come in. So that's just a given that we've had to deal with, and we have counselors and school psychologists and deans that work it all out. But for a time, there was girl fights that were happening. Like, what is this? Like, so many girl fights